Okay, so let's look at country roads. So this sort of covers two sections in DES really. So you've got pages 162, I think it starts really, where it talks about negotiating bends. Majority of times you're going to get a bend like the ones they're talking about with limit points, technical and vanishing points, but limit points officially is going to be on country roads. It's very unlikely the scenario here with trees and things on page 167 is going to happen in a town because the picture is fields, etc. So it's probably more like not country roads. And officially country roads starts on page 266 and only 2 pages or 1 3/4 pages. So there's not a lot on it, and I'm not going to read through this. Just wanted to cover sort of what happens on a part 2 really. So most, if not all, part 2s will incorporate some sort of country roads. And certainly now where we are in Southampton, they will do more country roads than they will other types of roads. So they do a little bit in town, do the manoeuvres, and then get out of town and do country roads and stuff. And the reason for that is because a lot of instructors don't teach them, and if they do teach them, they don't necessarily teach them correctly because they've not been tested themselves. So therefore, this is in the past. Now, certainly we're tested on them, and it's where the majority of KSI, seriously killed or injured accidents, will happen for new drivers is country roads, disproportionate to the high street and things like that. And if you think about it logically, country roads will tend to have a national speed limit. They tend to be 60. They tend to be unachievable for 60 most of the time. Depends on the type of road, of course. So you've got country roads, which is normally there's enough room for cars going in opposite directions to not have to meet each other and carry on. Therefore, higher speeds are achievable. And you've got country lanes where they tend to be thinner. You either have to pull into a put-in place or squeeze past each other or go at least a bit slower to get past each other, which can also be national speed limit. In my experience on a part 2, they tend to do country roads, not country lanes, but country lanes are still something you need to be very aware of because of where you teach and what you teach. But be careful of taking quite new pupils on country lanes because of the reaction times and having to find pull-in places and having to reverse if necessary. That can all be a bit of a flap really. And where we live, we're sort of forced to take pupils down country lanes because that may be the only way to their house. And Sosor has it that Billy the farmer is coming the other way in a massive tractor with a trailer. You've got no choice but to reverse the half mile you've just come down, which can be interesting. So if you can avoid it, you can avoid it. Sometimes you just can't avoid it because of where people live. You might in that situation decide to swap seats and do the reverse and beat yourself, otherwise you could be there for years, particularly if you've got banks either side. It can just be awkward kind of. So I think we're mainly going to talk about country roads here and why they do them on part 2. So as I said before, the main reason they do them on part 2 is to make sure that you're doing the correct things. I'm not going to go through what it says in the book, basically MSPSL, and change it around if necessary. Looking well ahead, planning the road well ahead, and that's important for you as instructors. I'm sure I've said this more than once before, because as an instructor you need to be looking well ahead, you need to be planning well ahead, and country roads is going to show that up to the examiner that maybe you're not looking as far ahead as you should, and therefore when your bum's in the other seat you're not going to be starting your processes early enough because you're not looking far enough ahead. So looking well ahead, looking across fields for example, looking for opening gates, looking sort of looking at the horizon, seeing if there's church spires or buildings coming up, because it probably means it's going to be a change of speed limit or at least a change of speed. Remember the speed limits aren't a target, so we don't have to do 16 and 60, and very often you can't, but the examiners want to see you make progress. So this is where it's a little bit of crux of position. You may not be able to do 60, but if they feel 50, 55 is achievable, then that's what you should be doing. But you also need to take into account weather conditions, road conditions. So by road conditions I mean things like potentially mud on the road. For example, I was out yesterday, essential journey, there was mud on the road, so I was easing off a bit. As I went round the corner, there's the tractor that's come out of the field. Because there's mud on the road, hasn't been driven over. I'm probably the first vehicle behind that other vehicle if it's not been driven over. So it's things like that. It's that thinking brain, that thinking about things that could happen, will happen, and why they happen. So looking for those clues, times a year. If it's a time of year where they're bringing the crops in and they say the gates are open, the crops have clearly been taken down, you know there's going to be tractors all over the place if you're in the country because they're doing what they're doing. They can be late into the evening or even in the middle of the night sometimes when they have to crack on because the rain's coming or something like that. So it's really country roads is about showing your ability to plan and think a little bit, I hate this phrase, but think outside the box, as in the box being your car. Thinking ahead, planning ahead, and just coming across those things. So as it says in here, there's no footpaths potentially, cyclists, potholes, cyclists going around potholes, etc., etc. So it's just about enhancing your observation and planning skills. So if you're driving in country roads and you get caught out by something, whatever that may be, you need to be self-analysing and self-reflecting on that and thinking, could have anticipated that the vicar was on his bike because it's 10 to 10 in the morning on a Sunday and there's a church around there. I could have anticipated there was probably someone on their bike going to church, for example. School kicking out times, villages have little schools, kids tend to cycle or scooter to and from school in villages. They do elsewhere, I know, but villages, they may not have footpaths and things like that. So just being very aware and just be thinking ahead, planning ahead, and just anticipating what's going to happen, really. And that's why they do quite a lot of country roads, because it really will show up your ability to plan well ahead, braking, all that sort of thing. So what they're also looking for is, again, mentioned this before, is not braking where possible, or braking before a bend rather than on or as you come out the bend, by planning well ahead. Look at things like road markings. If the white paint's getting more and the gap's getting less, that means there's a hazard coming up, probably. So you're starting to ease off. As soon as you start seeing the paint getting longer, more paint, more danger, start easing off a little bit. There, you're ready for it. I'm not going to go into limit points. There's a picture on page 167 talking about limit points, and it explains it probably better than I can here, because I confuse myself when I'm trying to do it without pictures. So have a look at that. That's on the new version. I don't think that was in the old version, but it's certainly in the new version. So it's worth looking at and seeing what they mean by I call them vanishing points, but limit points, and how they work. So the closer you get, basically, if the bend is going away from you, you can stay your speed. So if it's going away from you, you can speed up in theory, but you must always be able to stop in distancing to be clear. So that's always the golden rule. If the bend's staying the same, you need to be, you're doing the right speed for the bend. If the bend's coming towards you as you're going towards it, slow down, because there's going to be a problem. So that's quite important to really get a hang of that and get ways of explaining that to pupils. So when you're doing your part 2, going out really practicing that, because it's really important to teach your pupils that, because I'm sure you've seen cars on bends, in the bushes, all that sort of thing. And I think the funniest thing one I saw was a tight bend sign, the arrows, the black and white arrows. There was a car between the posts. So there's a nice sharp bend sign between the posts. It's worth explaining here that I was told once by someone who knows more than I do about these things, and I've looked at this, and it seems to be the case most of the time, like most things most of the time, that basically the more arrows on the post, on the sign, the tighter the bend. The more signs, the more the bend goes on for. So 2 arrows, 1 sign, not too sharp, and then you can look to see how sharp it actually is. 4 arrows and 4 lots of signs, very bendy and very sharp, probably going back on itself. So that's worth looking out for when you're driving around. Look for the number of arrows on the sign and the number of signs, and it does work more often than not. Again, it's always only good as the person that put the signs up, the person designed the signs, where the signs should go and how many. And it could just be they can't put as many signs as they want to because of gates and other obstructions that stop them putting signs up. But it's quite a good way of working out how bendy the bend is and how long it goes on for. Okay, Stephen's got a question. On part 2 test, if you are caught by surprise on country lane, should you acknowledge it to the examiner? You don't, as we said before, Stephen, you don't need to verbalise it. If you don't want to, they will know. Try not to be caught, because the clues are there, so the signs will be there. If the signs aren't there, there's probably someone's knocked them over, which gives you a clue. And look at the hedges, for example. So if you can see more left hedge than right hedge, it's a right-hand bend. If you can see more right hedge than left hedge, it's a left-hand bend, for example. As I say, as you're coming up to it, if you go forward a car length, you can see a car length, your speed's fine. If you go forward a car length and you can see half a car length, you need to slow down. If you go forward a car length, you can see 3 more car lengths, you could speed up if you want to, as long as you can stop in distancing to be clear, because there could be a tractor around the corner. Depends, if it's an open field, whether you've got high bushes, all those factors that need to be taken into account. And if it's single lane, then you've obviously got to be aware of oncoming vehicles, but we're talking about country lanes where they've got a lane either side. But you could still have a tractor with a trailer that's encroaching on your side of the road. So there's lots of factors, isn't there? That's why it takes practice. It seems quite straightforward, but if you live in a town and you don't really go out to the countryside very often, then go out there and have some practice. Certainly, so Southampton and other test centres I've used, Guildford, etc., they go out into the country because people do get caught there, and the most common failure is not making progress. So it's being too slow, too cautious. You know, but stopping distance seem to be clear, but they want to know that you know what that means and what that distance looks like in reality at given speeds. So it is a practice thing. It is something to go out with a trainer as well and have a look at. And I would say a trainer rather than I'm going to say normal ADI here, but I'm sure you know what I mean by that. Someone who predominantly does learners, because they don't necessarily take people out onto country roads as much, or get them to do what you would be expected to for a part 2. So some of the stuff is good to go out normal ADI for part 2. Some stuff is a little bit more specialised. So motorways, country roads, for example, are 2 specialised areas that a trainer would know probably more about than someone who doesn't train people, who doesn't do the only part 2 they've ever done is their own, for example. So that's worth being aware of. Okay, so I think that's probably covered that. It's a reasonably short subject. It's the book covers things like cyclists and particularly horses. So you've got a picture here of a car going over a solid white line to overtake a horse. So make sure you know what the rules are on solid white lines, because you get quite a lot of them in the country, and predominantly the one that's on your side, and what the rules are and what you can go past. Try again, read it and see. So this section, we go on to the section that covers white lines and lines, and notice it doesn't say overtake, it says cross. So you can overtake anything without going over the line, as long as you can give them enough room, of course, and that's probably unlikely, but it's possible. What you mustn't do is cross the white line, given some scenarios. But I could take you some homework. There's 3 listed in the essential skills, 3 times that you can go over the solid white line to pass someone. I'm going to say pass or overtake, but you can go over the line for that. And there's the others like turning right and things like that. But there's 3 occasions where you can overtake going over the line if you need to. But you can overtake any time if you don't go over the line. So the going over the line is the important bit. But I'll set you the homework for that. I'm not going to tell you what they are. But read it through and make sure that you take notice of the whole thing, because there's an element in there that's important. Which means that's why you can overtake this horse, but you might not be able to overtake the horse in another given situation, or particularly cyclists in a given situation. So have a look at the whole rule and see what that says, because that's probably more applicable to country roads than anywhere else. Okay, so any more questions? So it's a short one here because there's not too much to cover. It's really just encouraging you to go out there and have a practice and make progress. You know, if the car behind you can make progress and is tailgating you and he can do that speed without losing control, then you can as well. But don't obviously push it too much. Get to know where your limits are and the limits of different types of bends and things. Okay, so there's no more questions, so I will leave you to it. Sunday morning, we have to go and have Valentine's breakfast. I'm going to go and walk the dog. You know, there you are. Okay, that's probably why there's only 13 people on today, but I'm not going to go into that. Right, okay, so I will, and I didn't remind people about it yesterday either, which is my bad. So I will see you next week. No idea what I'm going to talk about next week, but I'm sure something will come up between now and then.